Welcome guys. Before us, we have a lesson where we are going to look at how to write a narrative composition in English, paper 1. So now, before we start with our lesson, for those that want to be part of our online class, please feel free to reach me on this number. So it can be that you are writing this year, or maybe you want to write next year. You can still join our class so that we see how we can move as a whole. So now we have a narrative composition, which is one of the compositions that you may find, or that you are likely to find in English paper 1, which is section A, and it's one of the composition that comes on the where you need to make a choice. Right, so now let's look at what is fully meant by a narrative composition. So a narrative composition is one that tells a story. So this is where the focus is. It's all about telling a story. Now, how you write your narrative composition or how you narrate is now where we want to now help ourselves, because it's not every story that will make sense. So what we want now is, what are the factors that we need to put into consideration to make our composition interesting? So let's define the word narration. So the act of telling a story is called narration. So the word narration is all about telling a story. So now, storytelling is very exciting. So you need to enjoy when you are writing a composition like this. Then what is this? What does it involve? So what you need to know is this narrative composition, it is both an art and a skill which can be developed with practice. Now, practice, we are not only talking about writing maybe these compositions or paragraphs every day. Practice also involves on at least you read a book every day. It can be a fiction book, it can be non-fiction, it can be a poetry, or it can be even a drama. So as long as it is a story that will assist you to move to the next level. Now let's move away from there. Now let's focus on what we call interpretation of a topic. So let's say you are given a certain topic. So you need to interpret that topic before you give it your best shot. Now we have two types of interpretations. So we are saying the interpretation of a narrative topic can either be, it can be literal or metaphorical. So it depends on the topic that you are given. So you need to give it a definition. If it's literal, then you need to write your composition according to literal. Then if it is metaphoric, answer according to metaphoric. Now what is really meant by this literal interpretation? So literal interpretation is when words in a topic are translated. So the keys here are translated exactly without giving the deeper or general meaning. So under this one, you don't have to translate in a deeper way. You just have to look at this one on the surface, or it's just to be, if you are talking about the person, then the story must be about the person. So this one does not involve like proverbs or adages. No. Now, if this is for literal interpretation, what of now metaphorical interpretation? So this one is the opposite of that. So for metaphoric interpretation is when words in a topic are translated by giving a deeper, so a deeper and unique meaning, right? So let's add some more. Right, so we have in writing narrative compositions, Both interpretations are acceptable so long they are relevant. However, there are exceptions, such as if you're dealing with, let's say the question is if it is with a proverb, or sometimes if it is with an adage. So an adage is an odd saying. So when writing a story based on proverb, the interpretation should always be metaphorical. Why? Because we've said metaphorical is deeper. You need to go deeper. For example, let's say we are told to write a story entitled Birds of Feather Flock Together. So this is not just a mere saying. It's deeper than the sound of this. We are not talking about birds. No. So if you interpret this topic in relation with the words that you are seeing, then what you are going to get is now what we call the literal. For example, we can say, if you write a story about how vultures never mix with pigeons, chickens never with ducks, and doves never with owls, then the interpretation is literal, and in this case cannot be acceptable. Why? We want a deeper meaning from this one. Right, so let's look at another small topic. So let's say write a story with the title A Snake in Green Grass. So if you write a story about how you saw a long green snake moving very fast in some short green grass and hissing towards you, 6 months old 6 months old baby sister who was sleeping under a shrub while you were weeding the maize field with your mother, and then narrate the events that followed, which led to the capture of the snake, your interpretation is literal and is not acceptable. So if you look at this topic, a snake in green grass, it's not necessarily about the snake. There is a deeper meaning than this. So if you interpret this title according to what you are understanding with the grammatical terms, then what you are doing with what we call literal interpretation. Now let's look at an example of this literal interpretation. So we are going to read through this passage. Then we are going to make a conclusion why this is called a literal. So we need to pay attention. So I start. When I visited my grandmother in the village, I could not believe the situation that I found her in. She had been living without food for the past 3 days. So this is simple. We are able to make pictures in our heads. Thank God I had carried some food for her. She was very happy to see me, and more so that I brought her some food. So 2 reasons. She was happy to see the granddaughter or grandchild, and in addition, because the person brought her some food. 3 days later, the food had carried finished. We starved for the next 2 days. So starvation has to do with anger, that anger for a longer period of time. We were literally living on water from the nearby well. On the 3rd day, a good Samaritan who had heard of my visit came to greet me. So we are told now, a good Samaritan who had heard of my visit. So someone heard that this grand mom or mother has received her grandchild, and this person wanted to come and greet the same grandchild. Now this visit wasn't the visit where you are called, you are told to come because you have a visitor. No, this was a visitation or a visit that this person decided to do on his own or her own. So now let's look at what happened next. He blessed us with some rice and a small piece of meat, enough for a meal for 2 people. As soon as he left, we prepared the meal and set ourselves to eat. So, as you can hear from the given passage, even if it's a story, we are able to create images. So that is what the focus of a narrative composition should be. So you need to make sure that you create a picture or pictures in the reader's mind. My grandmother advised that we thank God in prayer before eating. She's known for saying long prayers. She thanked God for everyone and everything. More so, she thanked God for the provision of that particular meal. For her, that was manna sent directly from heaven. The prayer was only interrupted by a knock at the door. My grandmother hastily said, "Amen," and come in. So we have another person here. When the door opened, I saw a hungry-looking elderly man. So the man's eyes settled on the food. He reminisced something like a prayer while making a sign of the cross. Without waiting to be offered a seat, he grabbed the dish of water, washed his hands, and gluttonously ate all the food. He said God was merciful to him for bringing him to greet us. He told us that he had been starving for a week before we realized the food was finished. He looked at us, thanked God, and told us how blessed this visit was. We were back to square one, hungrier than before. What an unwelcome visitor. So, this person, the reason why it is unwelcome visitor because they didn't invite him. Now, if you look at the meaning of this paragraph or paragraphs, it's about someone visiting you without your consent. You didn't invite that person. So the interpretation is direct and it's about a person. Since it's direct and about a person, this is what we call now literal interpretation. So literal interpretation is when the interpretation is just direct about what you are talking about. It's not that deeper. Now let's move on to metaphorical interpretation. So this one now is where you need to look at this one as deeper. So I begin. On Tuesday last week, I woke up in a jolly mood. So jolly mood is that mood where you are happy, you feel like everything is making sense. For some unknown reasons, I was so happy that I did not even notice myself moving from my bed to the bathroom. I found myself enjoying the warm bath in the bathtub. I was singing melodiously with my eyes closed while bathing. In the process, I heard a tap in the water. I ignored it. The tapping repeated, but I turned a deaf ear to it because I was enjoying the warm bath in the tub. So let's look at paragraph 2. When it persisted and I felt something warming itself against my left leg, I decided to wash the soap froth off my face. As soon as my face was clear and my eyes opened, I saw a huge cobra. So this is about now an animal which is a snake. Its diamond-shaped head was face to face with mine, and its triangular branch tongue was hissing and spitting some liquids into my nostrils. Okay, so let's look at what happened now. So, naked as I was, I helplessly, okay, I'm sure I may have jumped. Okay, so naked as I was, I helplessly jumped out of the bathtub and landed on the floor. So This person is explaining what happened after she saw that huge cobra. I managed to reach the door but could not open it. I passed out. When I regained my consciousness, I was in the hospital with a broken hip. I was told that I broke my hip while trying to run away from the visitor. What an unwelcome visitor. So the statement is about the visitor, but in our case, the visitor was a snake. So this meaning is deeper than the visitor. So as long as it's deeper and not necessarily about a person, therefore, the interpretation is what we call metaphorical. So to summarize what we are saying, literal is when you are just looking at that one on the surface point of view. Then metaphorical is when you look at that one deeper. So let's move away from the two interpretations. So now we move on to what we call point of view. So it's very important we look at this point of view. So when a topic is chosen, it is important to decide who tells the story in a narrative composition. Stories are told using, so you can use what we call the first person I or we. I did that, we did that. Or the third person he, she, it, or they. Meaning, which means that you are not supposed to use the second person point of view. You can't use you. You is the second point of view. For example, you can't say, once upon a time, you went to see a priest. That won't make sense because you is in a second position and we are not supposed to use that. So when a point of view is chosen, be consistent with it. So make sure that throughout your composition, you stick to that point of view. So let's look at this example where we are focusing on first person point of view. So I start, my little brother on my back only mourned a little and died shortly after. I noticed the blood around me was the poor child's and not my own, and that I had escaped with a slight scratch. I placed the child beneath the tree near other victims and fled from the hideous place. With my relatives wiped out, I wondered why I still courage to live, but I ran from the field of carnage to where I do not know. So if you focus here, we are looking at I first person, I first person. So this one is where you are given a question that you are the narrator, or we are saying you are acting as what we call protagonisti. Protagonisti. So this is where we are looking at you are acting as the main character. Now let's look at the second one. So the second one is where you are now using the third person point of view. So this is where you are narrating a story on somebody's behalf only. Another person is being the protagonist. So we can start. She found a place at last. Her favorite spots were all occupied, but this one was good enough. One man occupied the end of the slatted bench and appeared to be sleeping. She sat down at the other end and made sure that the carriage was properly braked and relaxed back in the comforting warmth. So from here we have she, we have her. So as we can see, this is now the third person. So here we have looked at the point of view. You are supposed to use the first point of view or the third point of view. Now, away from the point of view, we have what we call starting and ending. So the starting is very important. The ending is as well very important. So the opening sentence of a narrative composition is very crucial. So this is very crucial because this can be an eye catcher. This can be, we want the first sentence to attract the reader's attention. So the first part should not be boring. So what are we supposed to do now? So it must be very interesting and eye catcher. It should capture the reader's interest and stimulates him with the desire to read on. Like you want to know more. So the opening sentence must be fresh and original. Keep it short and simple. So here is now where it must not be trite or cliche. So what is cliche? So cliche is an overused expression that have been used for so many times, and because of that, such an expression has lost its original effectiveness and is no longer interesting. So avoid overused expression or avoid a cliche. So there is nothing grammatically wrong with it, but it is no longer interesting. Avoid writing memorized opening sentences and paragraphs that have been so overused throughout the year that they have become very trite, they have become cliche. So there are times where as you are going through as you are studying, going through different compositions, so there are statements people have become with different statements that have become like a cliche. So those statements have lost their meaning. For example, if you look at when you're writing an application letter, which is a business application letter, the first one under the introduction, mostly people they mostly use an expression like with the reference stated above, I hereby what. So that expression has been overused, and because of that it has lost its effectiveness. So we need to now come up with something new. So that's what we are saying. So that is that point. So for example, you can look at these sayings as some of the expressions that you can use in future. So we move on to now this point. So such introductory sentences captures the reader's attention. So here what we are saying is make sure that the introduction is able to capture the one that is going to read your paragraph, the attention of that person. So you can look at this one as an example. So this is about Okonkwo. For those that maybe if you have studied or been part of literature. Now we can move on to what we call characterization. So characterization is the process now by which writers create memorable characters. So this is where you choose the characters, like who is the main character. So in every story, there should be the main character, like the main culprit who were involved. Stories about people, it can be animals, or sometimes it can be things that would behave like real people. Such people in a story are called characters. The characters of a story are the people, animals involved in the storyline. Then characters should be realistic and convincing. So under characterization is where you look at the characters. In movies we used to call this the starring and the co-starring. So that is an example. So you need to look at who is going to play the main character and who is going to play the secondary or whatever. Then after that, we have what we call a suspense. So make sure that your composition leaves the reader in a suspense. What do you mean by in a suspense? A suspense is a feeling of anxious uncertainty about the outcome of event in a story. It's a point where you are reading a story or maybe watching a movie, then that feeling that we develop over a movie of wanting to know what happens next. So that feeling of wanting what happens, that eagerness, like let me watch another, let's say another episode, let me watch another season because I want to know what happened after this. So that feeling is what we call the suspense. So that's how the composition narrative should be. So it has to leave the reader in a suspense. So we are saying it is a feeling of tension or anxiety about what may happen. Now, in order to cultivate interest in the reader's mind, a composition should have such a feeling of anxiety. Suspense is not just some meaningless, abrupt ending. It raises questions in the mind of the reader as to what happens next. So you need to make sure that you also put this. So a story without suspense is very boring and is not worth reading to the end. It is just like a movie without suspense. You do not need to finish watching such a movie because you can easily project the outcome. So the suspense is where you don't know what will come. You don't even know what the outcome would be. So that's the thing they keep about the movie. So that movie that you enjoy, that movie that you don't want to miss, maybe at 18 hours, 19 hours, whatever, the reason why you are failing to control yourself over that movie because it was made in such a way that it leaves you in suspense. You want to know more. You want to know what happened to that person you love in that movie. Then we move on to telling and showing. So there is a difference. When you are writing a narrative composition, you can either tell a story or you can either show a story. What do we mean by that? Tell a story is where you are just telling someone, but showing is where you create pictures. You write a story in such a way that the person reading your story feels as if he or she is seeing what is happening. For example, if we say Okonko was so upset that he shot at the wife but he missed. This is telling. But let's look at show. So for show, we can see that at least it is a paragraph. Unfortunately for her, Okonko hid it and ran madly into his room for the loaded gun, ran out again and aimed at her as she clambered over the dwarf wall of the brain. So even up to here, we can at least come up with a picture of what was happening. So this is what we call the showing. So make sure your composition, your narrative composition is able to create showing a story. Now we have another point. So use of direct speech. So another way of enhancing interest in the story is the use of direct speech to introduce a dialogue. Now what is a dialogue? So a dialogue is a conversation between two or more people. So this brings characters and events to life. A good dialogue can serve main purpose in a narrative composition. It can create a sense of time and place, tell about character, and also foreshadow possible trouble. So let's look at an example where we can use direct speech. So this is now the story. When the evening came and the birds began to fly away, Nyambura went home. Joshua was there standing at the door. She did not like the way he looked at her. Something was wrong. He let her enter without saying a word to her. Miriam was inside, and she too did not speak to Nyambura. Her father followed her in. So let's look at what happened. So here is now where we have now the direct speech. Where have you been? So it's a question coming from her father. His voice was menacing. She was afraid of him. Then she answered, near the river. Who was with you? I was alone, father. She was trembling. She had gone to the river hoping that her savior would come in a cloud and rescue her. But Waiyaki had not come. Her obedience to her father had made her lose him. So the father asked, no one? Yes. So no one? Yes, you are lying. You are lying. I was alone, father, she insisted. Do not think I am blind. I am not that old. And don't you cheat yourself. I have not heard things. If I hear that you have been seeing with that your devil again, you no longer live in this house. I have been alone, she burst out, almost crying. I will tell you again. If you are seen with him once more, have they not done enough harm to this house? And don't you remember how they burnt the art of a man of God? But let me catch you. Let me catch you with him again. There was more than malice in that voice. Nyambura did not say anything else. This was her reward for being true and obedient to him. And because of her obedience, she had lost the one whom she loved, and with him her salvation. That night she could not sleep. She wept all the times, praying that God should kill her. So this is the river between. If you want to just look at this story on page 116. So this is where we are using the direct speech. So direct speech is where you use it can be the double inverted commas or single inverted commas. So this is what you are advised to do. So this is an example. Then we also have some sample question here. So here we have write a story with the title, make a hay while the sun shines. So this is you can go through. So you can go through to see how this is done. Then another one, a ruined wedding. So if it's not too much, please comment in the comment section below. One, how can you categorize the two examples that I've given you? Which one, let me not say which one, are they metaphorical or literal? Or is maybe one is literal, the other one is metaphorical? So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching.